Welcome everyone to the Hours. I'm Mark. I'm joined by, again, my good friend, Tyler. Together we're Savvy Coaching, and we're excited to spend this time with you. Tyler, welcome.
Thank you. So 24 hours in a day. Do you know how many seconds are in a day?
I don't.
I did. I memorized it at one point because it was a main point of a book that I read, and it just talked about like if you think about it in that way, you just feel like way more time rich and also much more efficient with your time. But it was so impactful that I forgot the number.
I do know that if you get 30 reps of something a day, that would be 10,000 reps a year, which is pretty nice.
30 reps a day is 10,000 a year. Okay,
Yep.
here's a small question then. All right, Mark, what's one thing that you believe everyone should get 30 reps of per day?
Shots. If you're in a basketball context, I think that'd be super easy. I even think like 30 minutes a day of shooting is really, really easy to commit to.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, I'm gonna say 30 push-ups.
I like that. Yeah,
30
I didn't think
push-ups.
about something like
At
that. Yeah,
all at all ages, stages of life, 30 push-ups a day.
I would even say maybe a more important movement, and maybe a strength and conditioning coach could tell us, is body weight squats. As you get older, I feel like just the movement is so important to be able to squat.
Well, as someone who skips leg day, I'm gonna stick with push-ups, actually. 86,400 seconds in a day. The book was Burn Your Goals by Josh Medcalf, and he just continually asks this question throughout the entire book. What are you doing with your 86,400 seconds today? It's a more compelling question than what are you doing with your 24 hours or your 14 waking hours or whatever.
Yeah, I read that book, gosh, over 10 years ago, easy, probably closer to 20 years ago. Is it worth a reread?
Um, no,
No. Okay.
I don't think it's worth a reread. Phil Jackson, one of his leadership methods with the Chicago Bulls, the tempestuous Chicago Bulls with Dennis Rodman of the second iteration, he showed his knowledge and care for each individual on that team by buying them each in an individual book. And so, like based on what their interests were, what he wanted them to grow in, or to show that he really understood them, at the beginning of the season, he gave them each a book. I know oftentimes we as coaches will buy a book for the team. Everyone read this book or whatnot. But he bought them each an individual book. Have you heard this story before, Mark?
I haven't, unless it's from the book Sacred Hoops, which was a one I read many moons ago, and I vaguely remember hearing about
It
this.
was definitely from one of his books. I'm not sure which one. Care to guess what book or type of book he bought for Dennis Rodman? That one's always stuck with me.
Oh gosh, I'm sure it was something quirky and out there.
A comic book. So
Yeah,
he bought him a comic book. And like I guess it really touched Dennis Rodman. He's like, you get me. He's like, I wouldn't read a real book.
exactly. I was going to say it had to be just something that he would actually read and look at.
Yeah. Which I think is a wonderful example of how individualized coaching should and can be, and like you can show care through for gestures like that. All that being said, you, Mark, should not read Burn Your Goals based on what I know about you and show you how much I care about you. For you, it would just be regurgitating mindsets that you've already adopted. Though many people should read Burn Your Goals. Shout out Josh Medcalf. We've had multiple conversations, and so I'm not shaming your book. I'm just saying I don't think it's not Mark's comic book.
Here's a big question for you then. You talked about Phil Jackson gave every player a book, showing them that they care. What is one way that a coach can show that they care about
Mm.
their program?
Well, I'll give two specific to players, and I think players do build the program. One line that I have found impacts players a lot, and I really like to use is "I've been thinking about you." So, you connect with the player before, after practice, during the thing, be like, I've been thinking about you. And it just shows that you care because you've been thinking about them outside of practice. And then the next thing that you say will tend to be more impactful. So the I've been thinking about you line is one I would really encourage coaches to adopt.
That's really cool. I love that you mentioned that on our cohort, which for those that don't know, our cohorts is where we spend our group consulting calls. We spend an hour or so, some usually more, with all of our paid members. They're welcome to join, ask any questions, but we'll also present. And our topic this month is how to improve your team like right now with very minimal reps. And I didn't frame it as I've been thinking about you, but one thing that I shared with our paid members is every Sunday have a list of your roster, every player in your program, and just write to the right of their name, what do they need right now? That might be confidence. It might be more shots, more touches in the game, more recognition, right? Whatever it is. But that's a great way to communicate that to the players. Just, I've been thinking about you, and this is, it's your opportunity to share what you think they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think that if that's the first chapter or one side of the bookend of the care, I think the other side of the bookend is in one-on-one moments and conversations, recognize the work they've been putting in individually. The majority of an individual player's mind is inherently self-absorbed. It's okay, how did I play? There's a certain skill or decision or technique or whatever that they just, it's all they think about, and they judge their practice or game performance on like, how did I do this one thing? And so when you can recognize growth in that thing or growth in a thing that you've asked them to grow in, say, hey, I really saw how aggressive you played today, or I loved how you were sealing in there today. That's another way to show that you care, when you recognize their individual improvement as opposed to just how they plug into the team machine.
I saw one thing. I hope I'm remembering this right, but it was like the number one or one of the main reasons why employees leave their job, and it was because lack of acknowledgement of the work that they're doing. So, yeah, I think as coaches, we can all be better at that.
Yeah, and well, Mark, so many people listening, I mean, we might take it for granted. At SAVI, one of the standards that we keep is a standard of celebration. And SAVI coaches, nearly every SAVI coach that we talk to in our cohorts, does carve out time for celebrations or giving out flowers, or I'm not sure what the other words people use. But at the end of every practice at SAVI, we encourage you to have an open time of celebration. Players can celebrate, coaches can celebrate, and it just guarantees that what's important happens. Players are acknowledged, encouraged, and praised.
Here's a way coaches can show they care as well and be an example, because I think that's the number one thing you can do to impact your program is to be an example, is doing the little things. And one little thing that I always enjoy doing, which is weird, but sweeping the floor for our program. And I think I did it for a few reasons. Is one, like, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I'm not willing to do. Right. I think, speaking of books, I think this was a Morgan Wooten book. And he was just like, coaches have to be willing to suck scum in order to win. Right. The little things aren't little. There are no little things. So, and I was very meticulous about the way it wanted to be done. So our players did sweep the floor. But it was just one thing, like, even during the school day, this is how much of a maniac I was, still am. During the school day, I would just go and sweep the floor because I knew PE classes were in there. And instead of letting it pile up throughout the day, I would just, if I had 10 minutes before my next class or before my next deal, I would just go in there, sweep the floor real fast. And yeah, I just felt like that was a good representation of, like, we're a hardworking program. Details matter. We're going to invest in the little things, knowing that those are a byproduct of winning. So, why do you think great coaches sweep the floor?
Oh, I like the jump you just made. Great coaches sweep the floor. I'm going to ask this question. Let's popcorn until we run out. Rapid fire. What's a qualifier when you are in the gym with a coach? If you're considering hiring a coach, when you are gauging the value of a coach, what are some small indicators that you think they have a chance at being a great coach? You said sweeping the floor is one. Let's just go back and forth and popcorn. I'll say showing up early, like being the first person to the gym would be another indicator.
All right. Another one would be doing something without being asked to do it.
Yep. Another one I would say is exuberance, like high external energy. There's not very many low energy great coaches.
Greeting people as they come in the gym.
hmm Knowing and using names. The coaches that I'm just bad at names are usually not great coaches.
Yeah. Funny story. I used to work a basketball camp every summer, and the director of the camp would come into the camp and say, "Hey, what's that kid's name?"
hmm
And you were responsible to know it. And we had about 64 kids in the gym. And whenever I didn't know it, I just made up a name knowing that he didn't know that, that player. But his whole his message there was, you're not bad at names, you don't care. Like if you cared enough, you'd know the
I
names.
ran camps for many, many years as well, and, like, I wasn't naturally good at memorizing names. So if you're like, "Oh, I must be a terrible coach," I don't no, you just haven't chosen to get good at it because, like anything with practice, you get a ton better at it. So we established a standard. We'd have 120 players at a camp, and by 24 hours, like one day in, after one night, you had to know if you were the director, you had to know every name. That was like our standard. And so, usually got like 95% or whatnot. But my trick, you had your trick. My trick was like, because everyone's like, oh my gosh, how do you learn names so fast, right? Well, my trick is I had 20 dialed in, and those were always the 20 people I called on whenever I was like asking questions like, Mark, what do you think? All right, Dante, what do you think? Or whatnot. And everyone's like, oh, how do you know these people's names? It's been like 10 minutes. I'm like, I'm only, like, everyone raises their hand, but I just picked the people whose name that I knew.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Genius.
Yeah. Let's go a
Okay.
couple more, then we can move on.
They sweat with their players.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to say they challenge their assistants.
I like that. Oh gosh. Okay. Oh, they are we talking about in practice or before practice, or does it
Anything.
matter? They
Anything.
they move around a lot. They cover a lot of real estate during practice.
Yes, they don't stand still. Good. I'm gonna say they get a lot of touches, like physical touches.
Yep. I will say they give individual instruction on the side.
Mhm. Yep. I'm gonna say they spend more time planning practice than they do executing practice. John Wooden.
Gosh, there's probably more, but I'm out.
Yeah, I'll say one more. They embrace difficult conversations. They run into the storm of difficult conversations. They might have the same fear and anxiety about it, but they have a greater fear over leaving loose ends or room for interpretations.
Yeah, I think the best cultures too, or the best programs, or anything, you normalize the hard conversations. Just like it takes some time. You mentioned spotlights or celebrations. It takes time to normalize those things as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, you don't want to have like a culture where it's overly competitive, where we don't really care about the relationship. We just care about winning. And then you don't want to have like the opposite side of like we're all about relationships, but we struggle to hold high standards because of that. The best programs, cultures are the balance of those, and to have that hard conversations. We used to call them honest, hard conversations. Are absolutely necessary, and I would say most coaches avoid that because that's human nature is to avoid hard things.
Let's transition to the mailbag. I'm going to give you this first one. It's from our free community. Head to savvyfree.com. If you're not a part of our free community, get your questions answered by our coaches, other Savvy coaches. You can peruse our library of classroom courses, drive in space, lock left, row series. You can check that all out in our free community. Ask questions. You might get answered on the mailbag. Okay, Rich mentioned this. He loved the in-game adjustments one, but Coach Rich said, "What would you do to delay a game when ahead, or to have a come from behind plan in a game? Let's say you are up 7, 3 minutes left."
Okay, first, ooh, this is good. This is fun. We talked about this a long time ago. Comeback game formula. So let's say there's three and some change. There's 3 minutes and 10 seconds left. Let's round that up to the next minute, which is four. Multiply by two, that is eight, and then we're going to add one, so that is nine. So if I'm down seven, the math would tell me, if I like this math, would tell me to stay the course. And I would say stay the course, chip away, you still got time. And then, maybe have an assistant in charge of your comeback. Your special situations coach is the one that's kind of needling you, saying, hey, we need to come back, or we're up nine with three to go. We can start milking the clock a little bit. So I think number one, I would have a system so we're not always guessing, although coaching is art and science. This would be the science. And then there's that feel part of it too. So whether you like that math or not, have a system for it. And then let's say I'm up and we're going delay game. We had a system, just kind of a change of pace that we called five high. We just ran our offense higher, wider. We were in nines only mode and free throws, unless you were, the top shooter, what we called green light shooters. Then you could take a seven. And another way that I would do this without having to take my foot off the gas offensively, if I didn't want to go to my delay game offense, we would adjust to our zone defense, thinking that offense would have a longer time to get a shot. It would kind of milk the game naturally for us.
All right. I'm going to take when you're up, how would you play? Because this coach actually kind of gave away his philosophy by naming it delay game. So his philosophy is actually to slow it down, delay them shooting a shot, trying to use as much clock as possible. Okay, so here is my overarching advice on end game situations and how to play when you're up. Practice it, and then you don't have to try to verbalize in the moment a change of how you play. If you don't actually practice these end game situations when you're up, when you're down with certain times and scores, you cannot expect your team to execute an adjustment well. Just like if you try to draw something up that they've never practiced, you have a very low chance of success. So, regardless of what you want to adjust, you must practice those adjustments. And I think now in season is a great time. You're not installing a lot of new things as you get towards the latter third of your season. And so much of your practice should be situational training so they can feel what those adjustments should feel like. Because there is a massive barrier between verbalizing how you want them to play and them actually changing what they've been doing, not just the whole game, but their entire lives. It's really hard to change.
Okay, here's a I love it. Here's a practical way to do that. In practice, I'm taking a little note here so I can use your terminology. All right, so how do we go from verbalizing what we want to changing the way we're playing? I would suggest randomly do it. So I said my delay game was called five high. Let's say we're playing 5-on-5, we're getting up and down, and without any prompt, without any heads up, I'm just yelling five high. And I'm going to see if my team can adjust on the fly. They know what that means, that we can execute it at a high level. If not, awesome. Like, okay, we need to work on that more. I should be yelling five high more in practice, or we might need to stop, talk about what we're trying to accomplish, what it looks like, clean that up more intentionally there. But I love just throwing a lot because a lot of coaches reach out like, how do we work special situations? My advice is you should do it way more. What's more important than training how to win the game? And in this case, you've won the game. You're really just playing against the clock now. So how do we play against the clock? Delay game. So how do we do that in practice? Randomly. It is the most game like way to do it, and it's a great test to see where your team is.
Okay, so now what sorts of things would you practice? I'm going to flip from the what was called the delayed game to what to do when you're down. Here are some things to practice when you're down. When you're down, traditionally there's a big emphasis put on stopping the clock by fouling. And I'll get to that, but that's actually not the first thing that I would actually flip. I would actually go to the offensive side and say, get fouled. Be way more physically aggressive and try to stop the clock by throwing your body into people. I mean, most referees have underdog syndrome as well. For whatever reason, they want to see a close game. And as a team's trying to come back at the end, they tend to get a little bit better whistle. They just do. So I'd go like, let's just get, let's force foul calls and clock stoppages as well as an opportunity to get more points. Second thing I do when you're down, I would go 5 to the offensive glass in like super, super aggressive mode. You've got to win the possession game somehow. So turn up your offensive rebounding. That should be something you can practice and you can kind of practically change more so than we're going to run this quick hitter when we're down. Let's just say when we shoot, let's be more offensive rebounding. Here's another one that I'll just call slappy D. As opposed to intentionally fouling when you're down, I think that this should start much earlier. I'd say if you're down with 5 minutes left in the game, just say, hey, let's get real slappy. And slappy means we're not trapping, we're not giving up layups. It just means we are making hard slaps and swipes at the ball handler's hands and arms. If it does result in a foul, we're not that upset anymore because we need to get ourselves close to the bonus earlier. And a lot of times coaches get caught by surprise, like, oh, we got to stop the clock. We're 4 fouls away from the bonus. And so we waste, 30 seconds just foul, 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 foul when the refs know we're fouling and we don't have a chance to actually force a turnover. Whereas with about 5 minutes left, you can just start like getting really slappy and physical, not on the body, but on the arm. And maybe some don't get called, which turn into steals. So, call it what you want. I call it get slappy on defense. All right, let's get slappy now. Next one, all snipe. defensively, all snipe. So huge overplays. When a team's up at the end of the game on offense, they tend to get more conservative. They tend to be less aggressive, throwing over the top passes because they're afraid that they might get stolen. They're in delay game. So even if you get beat backdoor or burned, they're gonna be less enthusiastic to throw that pass. And even if they do throw that pass is a proposition we have a chance to get a steal. You have less of a chance to get a steal if you allow short, sure passes in space. You have more chances to get a steal if you have forced bounce passes and lobs to the rim. So those would be like four little dials I think one could turn when down.
Yeah, man, I love all these. So one of my favorite coaches, a friend of mine, he's a fellow maniac as well. His number one adjustment in game, in timeouts, is get to the rack. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
just he
Yeah,
just yells that for 32 minutes. Just
I
get
love
to the rack.
it.
So if you get to the rack, not only will you get more fouls, but you're also going to generate more sevens because you're hunting your nine first, you're kicking for sevens, and then you bang a seven in, and it's a momentum play. Now you're setting up your press. We're getting slappy defensively, so now it turns into a 5-0 run. So I love that. Send five to the offensive glass. I'll go the other way thinking of delay game. One thing I always had on my game sheet, and shout out Ben in our paid community, he started a thread about what coaches should have in the games, like on them. On my game sheet, I always had the reminder of when we have a lead, if I don't want to take my foot off the gas, but I want to slow the game down, don't crash anybody. So with a lead, just get everybody back. Let's get set. Let's make it tough on them. No easy baskets. But I love the inverse of that. When down, super aggressive on the boards. You typically make 65% of your second chance points. Get slappy on defense. Get slappy as you put the onus on the officials, right? They're human too. Like you said, everybody loves an underdog. You might get away with a couple, and worst case scenario, we foul, we're getting up to the bonus. Everything that you said. I'll also say this: let's start trapping first and trying to turn them over instead of going straight to fouling. So when it is time to just intentionally foul, let's go one trap and then foul. Our call for intentionally fouling was code red, like red, stop the clock. I would call code yellow. So yellow, yellow, yellow is one trap and then foul if they get out of it. So that might be something that coaches can implement. And then all snipe, I love it. You're going to make the ball go. You're not going to let them run their delay game. And the hope is that they dribble into a really tough five so shot. And then that is our outlet. We're rebounding, we're racing, and we're going to get a nine. Then it all starts over. Then we're getting to the rack and getting nines.
I mean, I feel like we can end it right there. I'm ready to go play some in game
Let's do it.
situations. Yeah, I love me a good in game situation. Okay, let's see what we've got next here.
I got one for you that we went long on that, so we could probably go short on this one. In the last two games, this coach running lock left has forced about 60 to 63% of their shots on the left side of the floor. Just curious, is there a specific number you're looking at, or what's a realistic number of shots on the left side when running lock left? Before you answer, I'll celebrate this coach for measuring something and having that number at their disposal.
Yeah, agreed. Simple answer, 70%. 70% would be a good benchmark. More complex answer is +1. Okay, measure where you're at and then raise the standard wherever you're at. If you're at 20% or if you're at 90%. Progression is the key. 70 is a strong majority. We want a strong majority. And then like another level of this, after you feel like you hit your benchmark of 70, then start measuring what types of shots you're getting from the left-hand side of the floor. The left-hand side of the floor will show that you're getting the ball to jail and keeping it there pretty well. And the possession ends with a shot most of the time. Now, what types of shots are we actually generating defensively would be the next thing that I would suggest measuring.
Let's go to game of the week.
All right, the game of the week is the 4 L's of shooting. And I'm just going to actually mark this because I've made a change in my sequence of the 4 L's. Again, the 4 L's are how I would teach, especially youth players, but every player, how to generate power with a focus on function and not form. And these are the four things I think are more important than like if beef was like traditional shooting of what proper form would be. These are the places that I would start with anyone, but especially youth players. And in a very practical way, I would do this as a tune-up when players first get in the gym for practice. and they can do it very, very simply. Here are the 4 L's. I'll list them for you. Then I'll talk through how a player would approach this as a tune-up to get NATO on the outcome of their makes and misses and try to establish a feeling. The first L stands for laces. The second L stands for load. The third L stands for lift, and the last L stands for line. Laces. In order to shoot the ball straight, you need the center of your hand on the center of the basketball. Laces would be similar to seams. Many young and inexperienced shooters don't find seams every time they shoot, whereas the best shooters in the world often find seams every time they shoot. Now, while there's nothing magical about seams, great shooters do like the feel and the grip of seams, and it gives you a template for where your hand should be on the ball, because we don't want players staring at their hands on the ball every time they catch it in a game. They need to feel a way to get the center of their hand, the center of the ball. So laces is just getting their shooting hand, something like their peace sign, with their fingertips in a seam on the center line of the basketball. Most young players don't do this. So I want players to focus all of their attention on lacing the ball before they actually go into their shot, instead of just catching and firing and catching and firing. So I would have a player do laces for 5 shots from one step away from the rim. This would be different than your one hand old school form shooting. Second, load. We want to load 2 things. We want to load our hips down and the ball in. So once they lace their hands, they load hips and ball into their belly button, hips down and back. That is going to trigger the start of their shot. Third thing, lift. One of the hardest things for a player to master is the sequence or the rhythm of their shot. It's because they associate their arms and the ball with their hips. And so lift is just, we want to make sure that we lift the ball without lifting our hips. That's it. Can we lift the ball without lifting our hips? And so their focus is going to be that. Can I get my hand under the ball before my hips fire? It's just a sequencing thing. Sequence equals power. And finally, line. And you might want to do this with some youth players. I had our youth players do it last night. I had 2 players grab right hands facing each other, 10 toes facing each other, chest facing each other. And they grabbed right hands. And I said, play tug of war, go. When they exerted force on each other, what happened to their shoulders? Their shoulders turned, and the line of tension became straight from their shoulder to their opponent. I said, that is how you want to line up your shot. We want to line things straight off our shoulder through our arm. We don't want to line things from our toes or from our chest. And so on their finish, instead of freeze your finish or freeze your follow through, I want players to evaluate their line from their shoulder through their fingers to the rim, forgetting about their chest and their toes, and only line from their shoulder through their fingers. And so that would be the 4th set of 5 shots. It's 20 shots. You lace, you load, you lift, you line, you change your focus onto one thing for each set of 5 shots. And over time, you tune up your shot. That would be the 4L tune-up that I would do with every youth player across the country.
One thing we do for our paid members is we do film breakdowns of their shot. And I would say I've learned more about shooting from watching your feedback to players and shooting than I have in all of my years of being around basketball, because I actually grew up on the old beef method of, what is it, balance, eyes, elbow, and follow through.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a reaction. My apologies. It triggered me.
I didn't mean to offend you. Yeah.
There's nothing
But
wrong with those things. It's just how
right.
they're taught, I think, is ineffective. There's nothing
100%.
wrong with balance or elbows. I don't hate elbows.
I mean, balance is part of load, right?
Balance is part of load. Exactly. Balance is part of load.
All right. Teach better segment. I'm going to take this one, and it's from the mailbag, and it's from a friend of mine, GC. I've known GC for years, and he says that his team is displaying entitled behavior, arguing with officials, poor body language when they come out of the gym. We've all seen it and been there as coaches. So we talked about honest, hard conversations earlier and protecting your culture. And I will have one right now. If you don't like what's happening with your team as the head coach, it is your fault, because it means we've either, okay, let me back up. We either failed to establish standards around these, or somewhere along the way, we failed to cut the head off of the snake. One thing that has really stuck with me: be very proactive when you see something and see every challenge as an opportunity. Like, oh, player arguing with an official, great. This is an opportunity for us to nip this in the bud right now, where it doesn't happen the rest of the year. So teach better segment is, man, we're in line to have some honest, hard conversations, because what's exhausting about being a head coach, and if you're a head coach, you know this. If you've never been a head coach, heavy is the head that wears the crown, is you are constantly fighting the human tendency to be mediocre. And it is exhausting. I think it's one thing that wears head coaches down. And along with NIL and transfer portal and all that stuff, that is like what I think what drives coaches out is the constant fight for to battle mediocrity. So I would say this: let's go body language here. Here's how I would enforce or like teach our standards better. Have your players write down 3 traits of great body language and 3 traits of poor body language, and just raising their awareness to that, and then watch it on film and just say, hey, what type of team are we right now? And then what type of team do we want to be? When you're addressing these players that come out, let's say a player argued with an official, so we took them out, and then they had bad body language. Instead of feeling the need to go fix, let's approach it with a more of a connection piece where I might just go up to that player and say, Tyler, you seem really frustrated right now, and just let them talk. Let them go instead of saying, you can't do that. That's not who we. During the game, if you're having to do that, it's already too late. Let them vent. Maybe it's because they think they got fouled because defense was getting slappy and the refs didn't call it, whatever it is. But just let them vent. A lot of times, like we even said at the beginning of the podcast, people just want to be heard and acknowledged.
One of the greatest complaints that I hear from coaches is how entitled this generation is. And they associate that with the rise of technology and social media and access. And here's what I'd offer up to all of our savvy coaches: kids these days aren't different. You are. As each of us as individuals and leaders develop higher standards, as we go through the course of this thing, our standards elevate as we get older, as we learn more, as we become more excellent. We also had much lower standards when we were young. When we were youth, when we were young coaches, we had lower standards. We're the different ones. They're not different. And so that is why so many more mature leaders throughout all generations, going back to ancient times, would complain about kids these days. It's because it's the progression of maturity. Kids these days aren't different. We are. And so what we have to understand is, how do we then train them up on their progression as opposed to get frustrated? We don't have to teach young people how to be entitled. We have to teach them how not to be entitled, right? And that is just the nature of teaching leadership, and that's what coaching is.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, coaches all the time will say, these kids don't want it as much as we did. But it's like, well, you probably didn't that as a player either, or it probably wasn't early in your career. Now, as a coach, we're looking at it from a completely different perspective. So, really good stuff.
Yep. Well, as always, we thank you for spending your 86,400 seconds with us. I hope, let me check myself here. Yes. Thanks for sending some of your 86,400 seconds with us. That's what the hours are. Mark, final thoughts?
Stay savvy.
Stay savvy.
And beef, it's what's for dinner.
4 L's, baby. Lasagna, leg of lamb,
All of it.
legumes. All right. Can't wait to see you guys next time.
All right. Yeah. Later.